One of Carl Jung's most foundational beliefs towards dreams is that people should take them for what they are. Whether or not you believe in some sort of metaphysical or strong psychological aspect to these dreams, it's important to recognize that they exist as what they are, at least. They're more than just illusions, but even if you think about an illusion, illusions are a fascinating phenomena that happen that you could spend a lifetime studying and trying to understand. And there's a lot that you can learn just from illusions. So even whatever you believe dreams are, it's important to recognize that they do exist. They're not nothing. So I think like a lot of people, they just think it's something that's so fleeting and meaningless right away that tends to undermine their actual meaning that you might potentially find in them. Carl Jung's second rule for dream analysis is to stay humble, realize that the dreams speak in a different language than what we're commonly used to understanding. So when you're trying to interpret a dream, it's almost like trying to understand someone speaking another language. So when people see something crazy that happens in their dream, they might write it off as some nonsense. And they're just like, it's so wild, it makes zero sense. There's nothing that I can possibly pull from that. It's just some sort of funny scenes that my mind recreated or something that got triggered from throughout the day or something. But it's because dreams speak symbolically and through emotional symbolism as well. It's also actually it's more like someone speaking to you in like with a bunch of slang that you don't understand, because you can recognize most of it, you see what's going on, but a lot of the things have different meanings than what you're usually used to. So like if me and my son pass a car on the road and he's like, "Yo, that car is hot." And I'm like, that car is hot, like it's really warm, like it's burning. So, and this the same thing goes for like symbols in your dreams. You might see something and then completely miss the actual meaning behind it. Also, Carl Jung talked about the importance of someone who's trying to analyze someone else's dream, like a doctor or psychologist or any type of professional that's trying to psychoanalyze someone based on their dream. It's important for that person to not put suggestions into the person's mind, because through those suggestions, you might start to push that person in a certain direction. And through the power of suggestion, they might find meaning in something, and it might completely keep them blinded to the actual meanings. Carl Jung, I would say that's one of his foundational rules, was that you don't want to put any of your input into it. You want to completely let the subject pull it out of themselves. And we've seen that with some of the people that we've interviewed here. The other thing is that, oh, Helen, you said the other night I dreamed I said something out of pure anger to someone. I woke up, looked in my closet, and saw another evil me hanging in the closet. So I took her out off her hanger and tried chasing her around to exorcise her from my life. Short version, but very wild. Wow, that is a wild one. Very, very interesting. I don't know. How do you feel about that? How did it make you feel? Like, what do you take from that? And how did you wake up? Did you ever get her out of your life? Were you able to chase her out? Did you feel any sense of satisfaction or accomplishment? We're gonna get into like the shadow self and all that, which it seems to me personally, I could be totally wrong, and that might be me putting a suggestion out there, like I was just saying not to, but you said you were wrong to say things out of anger. I'm contrite, but there was no finale. I did not get to finish exercising her. I just prayed. Okay, so no conclusion, no type of closure from that. So that I think it would help if I keep along here and we get into maybe what the shadow self represents in Jungian psychology. He said it may not be over yet. I'm hoping for a rerun. Yeah, definitely let me know if you have if that reoccurs, if that theme, even if it's not that exact dream, but if something that maybe seems to represent a similar theme as that, just let me know. That's interesting. We should definitely keep our eyes on that and try to track that and maybe pick up some sort of patterns here. I remember some of the dreams from your past too. Maybe we can Yeah, there's a lot to explore with some of that. Should I look at my closet, with suspicion now? Yeah, it's gonna feel weird to you for a while now. Maybe just focusing on that might help and reinduce that type of dream too. That's very, very interesting. And that's one of the reasons why, and I don't want to put anything out there solid about what that could mean, but I'm sure you could personally pick a lot of different meanings from that. You're pretty in tune and in touch, and you're definitely not clueless with any of this. I think it's important to follow another one of Carl Jung's rules for dream interpretation, and that's to keep all of your responses and all of your reactions and everything you analyze about the dream, keep it hypothetical and don't necessarily try to solidify anything, because then you may box it in, and again you might blind yourself from a lot of other meanings, because sometimes farther down the road, thinking back on something, you'll find a lot more meaning in it, especially with some more context from your life or from other dreams that happen afterwards. So thinking that you found the ultimate understanding or conclusion to a dream, Carl Jung says, is limiting, and he thinks it's important to keep your interpretations very flexible, and that there's layers of meanings in them. It's very rare that there's one solid meaning to a dream. Another one of Carl Jung's rules for dreams was to stay close to the symbols. Don't stray too far from the symbols. This is kind of in contrast to Freud's free association approach to dreams, where he'll take something that happens in the dream and he'll find something that it might reflect in your waking life and automatically holds strong to that association, meaning that the symbol in your dream can have a completely different meaning in your life that often is sometimes it's a stretch to get from one to the other. Carl Jung thought it was important to, even though you want to keep your interpretations flexible, you want to stay as close to the actual symbolism and the actual occurrence and the actual emotion as you possibly can, because when you start to stray off into a lot of those muddy waters, you can again blind yourself from the actual meaning. Whereas Freud would almost automatically associate a symbol with a completely separate meaning, and then he would dissect that separate meaning as thoroughly as he can, and sometimes veer off from the actual foundation of the original symbol. Stay close to the symbols. Like I said, he spent 60 years writing about this specific topic and analyzing people from all different areas of the world. And that's how he discovered his archetypes, or he's discovered the dream archetypes, which we've talked about before. So I may as well get into that. And, he was so well-rounded. He would analyze people from his home in Switzerland, and he would find symbols and patterns in their dreams. And then he traveled to England. He traveled to tribes in East Africa, tribes that had never come in contact with European men. He traveled to India, which is where he really had a spiritual shift. And he traveled to America. And in all those places, he would analyze the symbols in their dreams and the patterns. And what Jung realized was that all of these people had some universal symbols that they all experienced. And he wondered how people separated by so many miles that have never come in contact with each other could have so many similar symbols and themes in their dreams. And, out of all the possibilities, there's certain foundational things that almost everyone experiences. At least everyone that he ever analyzed experienced some of these things. Helen, you're saying to focus on the initial interpretation. Helen, I guess you could say that, but I'm not necessarily saying to focus on the initial interpretation. I think you're talking about when I was saying Carl Jung's rule to stay close to the symbols. Keep your interpretations loose, but focus on the initial dream. So whatever different interpretations you might be able to pull from the specific feelings in that dream and the specific scenes and images in that dream, what are all the different types of things that, like, you hiding your separate self in the closet might mean? instead of taking one thing that might mean and then dissecting that one thing. You know, like for example, and I'm completely making this up off the top of my head, and this is not like true in any way, but I'm saying like Freud's approach generally might be like, yeah, I don't want to get too weird because Freud was kind of creepy and weird, but he would say maybe yelling something that you're not comfortable with and then putting yourself in the closet might be you projecting something that your mother used to do to you. So you'd be like, okay, so your mother used to scream at you, right? And now in your later life, you try to ignore that and forget all the things that she used to scream at you, and you push that to the side and you don't acknowledge that anymore. Maybe that's you putting it in the closet. And then Freud would spend the rest of his treatment with you basically picking apart that, like your mother and how she used to yell at you and all of that, where there might be other meanings to that other skin of you in the closet. So instead of completely veering off and going off with one interpretation, stay close to the initial one and try to pick that apart as much as you possibly can. And this is what Carl Jung suggested. And I'm glad you asked so we could clarify that as an example. But and I'm not sure if I made that clear, but I tried. So Jung noticed that there's different symbols that people experience somewhat universally, and he called those the archetypes. Now there's different layers of archetypes, different branches of archetypes, but there's the foundational ones that he found. To understand the archetypes, I think it's kind of important to talk about how Carl Jung separated the human psyche. So Carl Jung separated the psyche into three basic distinct areas. And he broke every one of those down into more subtopics. He basically separated the human psyche into three different levels. There's consciousness, the personal unconsciousness, and then the collective unconsciousness that we reference so much. The consciousness is your awareness that you're born with of the world. It's your simple awareness. You have this consciousness when you're born as a baby. Helen, you said your mind sometimes struggles when asleep to solve a problem. Yes, that may potentially be true. I really believe that that's your subconscious is what's speaking to you through the dream. And I think your subconscious is better at creative problem solving than your consciousness. No, I think your subconscious is capable of more complex and long-term calculations of scenarios. Okay, so you have your consciousness. The consciousness is basically the awareness that you share with yourself and the people directly around you. Your personal consciousness you form over time more, and it's more of your awareness of yourself. And then there's the personal unconsciousness, and that's the thoughts and the things that go on that you're not quite aware of. I think we're all somewhat familiar with, we have our consciousness on the surface, that things that we're regularly somewhat aware of. And then we have all the things that go on in the unconsciousness. And, these are subtle suggestions and things that affect us psychologically that we don't bring to the surface of our mind. It might be the actions that you've formed from watching a certain type of person, and then when you run into a similar type of person, you will treat that person similarly to the person that you're subconsciously associating with them, or unconsciously, I should say. So that's the personal unconscious. We all have our own personal unconscious. The collective unconsciousness is, as it suggests, the collection of all humans, or not even all humans, all beings, and the unconscious thoughts or understandings that they share collectively. And he believed that we all kind of pulled from this one singular infinite pool of collective unconscious to bring things up into our consciousness. These are things that are not so personal to you, but are more universal to the mind in general. So if we can break down the archetypes, there's actually so many archetypes. You could probably, the more you study, the more you'll find, but these are the main ones that Carl Jung referenced and identified in his work. There's the self, the persona, the anima, animus, which are within the shadow. And then there's the father, the mother, the wise old man, the hero, and the trickster. And these are all personifications of the self in different ways that appear throughout dreams that he identified that people universally connected with. Helen said, yeah, but we don't get to delve into the collective, or at least I don't. I have to deal with my own archetypes. Yes, yes, you do, but the archetypes rise out of the collective. So the archetypes are your connection to the collective. So that's how you delve into the collective. Your own archetypes, if you're talking about, we all have our own archetypes because they're our version of that archetype, but all those archetypes share the same source, the same, they're all similar in different ways. Although they appear differently to everyone, they hold the same significance and meaning in them. And if you're talking about like your own symbols, you might have to deal with your own symbols, but those are not archetypes. Those are more individual symbols, if that's what you're referring to. But most of us, most of the time, do experience these archetypes, which are universal symbols that everyone experiences in slightly different ways. It's their own incarnation from their own perspective of that archetype, which comes from the collective. And you may realize that some of your own personal symbols might actually be connected to some of these archetypes. You never know. So to get into the first archetype, the self, that is the collective sum of the conscious and the unconscious, the personal unconscious. That is the self. This is what we're born with, and then what we've kind of accumulated, whether genetically and environmentally. That forms the first archetype, the self. Then the next one is the persona, and the persona is the image and the portrayal that we give to others around us. It's what we're, as much of ourselves as we're willing to share and show to the world. How we want to make ourselves seem. Doesn't mean it's not genuine. It just means that as we're trying to pick and choose what we display in our persona, there are certain things that we're kind of pushing to the back that we choose not to show to people on the surface. Now, all of those things that we push to the back, those are the third archetype, which is the shadow. All of those things that we don't show in our persona, we keep kind of hidden from our own consciousness and others, that creates our shadow self. The shadow self, different than the self, because the self is partially what we're born with. The shadow self is strictly, it's formed over a period of time throughout our life through experiences and different ways that we interpret our environment and stuff. And that's also what builds the ego. So I didn't even mention the ego. I meant to touch on that, but and the ego is plays a strong part in all of this also. So, but we can get into that more. The fourth archetype's the anima and the animus, and they're born out of the shadow self. The anima is the personification of basically all feminine aspects of nature and humanity that every man can identify with, but we push it so far from our consciousness. It really, for most men, it exists deep underneath our actual consciousness. It is what we identify as generally feminine traits. And it doesn't just mean like feminine, how we would think woman, but it's also like the emotional side of things. So when men are kind of acting without thinking, completely irrational, acting completely emotional, and that is affecting their life in a negative way, a lot of times Jung would say that is the anima that's showing up out of their shadow self. Because what he would notice is that when men are going through these emotional bouts in their life, their dreams usually reflect some sort of personification of this generally feminine figure. And it's different than the mother figure. Didi, you said, is it society? Hollywood exploiting our addictions to certain archetypes, manipulating us. Yeah, I mean definitely does happen on a large scale. I believe Hollywood exploiting our addictions to certain archetypes, manipulating us. Yeah, and some of them might not realize that that's what they're doing. They just realize that that's what makes money, so they're trying to make the most money, and they're using that as bait, basically. So yeah, some of them for sure, and some of them might understand the psychology of it and what they're doing. You said you're talking about indoctrination and exploiting some of our addiction to certain archetypes, and also the success of some movies. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think so. You mean like, are they consciously doing it? Yeah, I think some of them really are. They may be aware of this, and they definitely may exploit that for sure, for sure. I mean, you see the archetypal figures all over Hollywood in all of the main movies. But also, they might not all be exploiting. It's also just some of it may be genuinely exploring our fascination with those archetypes, not just exploiting our addiction to those archetypes. Helen, you said, does that make us have unrealistic expectations of partners? Edie, you said intentionally, yeah. Helen, not necessarily. I mean, yes, that does go on in Hollywood, the exploitation of these unrealistic, yes, all of that does happen, but that's not necessarily fueled from these archetypes completely. Like, I think sometimes yes, but I think mostly no. These archetypes have appeared in literature throughout all of human history. All of the greatest stories known throughout mankind, and a lot of great poetry and epic tragedies, they show some reflection of a lot of these archetypes, the hero, the trickster, the shadow, the persona, like all of that, the anima, the animus. I think it's not, yes, I do think that it's, yes, you know what, Helen? I do think that it does make us have unrealistic expectations of partners when it's used intentionally to exploit our addiction to those archetypes. Yes, yes, but I don't think that's all of it. I think there's a lot more than just that. But yes, that's a big part of what is going on for sure. And it's definitely a problem. And I think it's pretty hard to argue against that. I think it's pretty clear that Hollywood is exploiting what we subconsciously connect to these archetypes. We have a fascination with it. It knows that it's a foundational part of our psyche. Yeah, and a lot of those writers for a lot of those movies and stuff, they do study a lot of these things. They study psychology so that they can manipulate people for sure. And they end up in those places where they can make those decisions that affect us on a massive level. But that's not all of it. Some of it is truly just exploring our fascination with these archetypes. Okay, so we talked about number one, the self, which is the sum of the conscious and the unconscious. Then we have the persona, which is what we display as ourself to the world. Then we have the shadow, which is basically what we choose. It's not even usually a choice. It's what we don't display to the world because we're uncomfortable with it naturally, and we almost try to separate from it and act as if it's not a part of us when it really is. And shadow work is a deep, complex topic. Shadow work is usually the things you're most reluctant to admit, the truths about yourself that you're most reluctant to admit and acknowledge, that you bring to the surface and acknowledge them. And Carl Jung talks about the acknowledgement of the shadow being a lifelong process. So it's never like you can never go through some practice and like be healed for the rest of your life. There's always going to be different aspects of our shadow self that we have to acknowledge in order to understand and to keep them from controlling us in ways that we don't even realize. Yeah, Carl Jung would talk about how these archetypes start to show up in dreams, and especially with the shadow self, it's things that you're not comfortable with. Usually those are the things that you hate the most about other people because you know how true they are and you know that there's a piece of that in you somewhere if you were to choose to acknowledge it. And that's usually what you end up projecting because you're trying to push it away, if that makes sense. There's the self, the persona, the shadow, the anima, and the animus, which come from the shadow. Like I was saying, this is where I left off before. The anima, personification of femininity for men. That's exists within every man, usually deep, deep within the shadow. Almost like men try to separate themselves from that so much. Didi, you said the shadow get composed from what society refuses to accept. Partially, yes, and I think there are universal aspects of the shadow self beyond what society builds. I think that there's definitely aspects of the shadow self that are composed from more universal understandings of the nature of good and evil and whatnot. But yes, a large part of it would be composed from what society refuses to accept. Depending on what's generally accepted in society, that would have a big difference on what shapes the person's shadow self in that society. That's a good point. That's a very good point, actually. And that may be why some societies, men are more in touch with the anima, and the men have learned to integrate the anima, and women have learned to integrate the animus more. And so the animus, which I haven't got onto yet, the animus is the personification of all masculine energy that arises out of the shadow of for females. It's basically because I mean, and this is a vast generalization, but generally males function through their life more rationally and women function more emotionally. It doesn't mean that men can't have emotional intelligence, and it doesn't mean that women can't have rational intelligence. I know many women that have more rational intelligence than many men. But as a vast generalization, just as like masculine and feminine energy, for the sake of understanding, there's the anima, the feminine, which is the emotional, and the animus, which is the masculine, the logical. But I think, me personally, looking at people in my life that I know and just like generally doing an overview of it, yes, men have less emotional intelligence and react to things and work through problems less with emotion. Women do it with more emotions. Okay, so when the man starts to integrate the anima into his life and starts to do some shadow work, and it's basically when a man is accepting his feminine traits, appreciating them more rather than suppressing it. And it doesn't mean a guy like coming out as gay or anything. It doesn't have to be that. I mean, that could be it too, but Didi, you said that yogis say the man is the consciousness, the woman is the energy. Hmm. Because like the consciousness could represent the logic and the energy could represent the emotion, I guess. That's interesting. I like that. But yeah, basically a man getting in touch with his feminine side, that could be him integrating, which, and for me, it doesn't have to be, like I said, it doesn't have to be a man turning into a trans or so. It's not that weird stuff. That's not what we're talking about here. I mean, that could be part of it for some people, but that's not what Carl Jung was referring to in this sense. I mean, as I started to work with my shadow self and do shadow work and learn about some of this, I started to go through a lot of my old poetry, and then I started to write more poetry, and I noticed that poetry was not logical. It was emotional, So that was me kind of integrating the anima. And once it becomes integrated with you, Carl Jung calls that the eros or the eros, the eros, which is represented as a slightly different figure. It's after that has been integrated. The characters seem to show themselves slightly differently, and he called that the eros. And then when a woman starts to integrate the animus, the masculine side of her shadow self, he called that the logos. And beautiful, Didi said, yeah, it really is. So those are the more complex archetypes that I kind of wanted to get into. And then you have the obvious ones. You have the father figure, the symbol that shows itself to a lot of people in their dreams. as a father figure, a guiding figure. Carl Jung specified that every archetype has an masculine and a feminine side to it. So, but the anima and the animus are two completely separate things. They're their own personifications. But within these archetypes, like the father, it's overall the comforting feeling that you get from a masculine energy. And then it's usually like a guide, like a shining light. It represents itself as, Zeus, the father figure, And then the mother, there's obviously the mother is another archetype that shows up in a lot of people's dreams universally. Just, a mother figure, the comforting, the holding, the emotional connection, creation, source energy, things like that. And then there's the wise old man, who reveals himself in a lot of different people's dreams in similar ways. And it's represented as something that seems of a higher understanding beyond what you're currently capable of perceiving. And then that wise old man can usually find ways to make you realize that wisdom within yourself. And that's usually, like in most movies and most stories, that's the role that the wise old man plays. He usually tries to help you find some sort of understanding within yourself, because that's the difference between wisdom and knowledge. Like knowledge is knowing, and then wisdom is the experience and the application and the understanding that comes from that. Like the wise old man, obviously that's represented as like the Gandalf, the Yoda. If you look in most stories, you could find who plays that role. And if you go back over some of your dreams, or if you start recognizing your dreams now, I bet you'll find that figure in some of them, at least. I know I do. And then there's the hero. That's the center of attention, the one that has to have a struggle. There's no hero without a struggle. So the hero is born from struggle, and the hero, what makes it a hero is overcoming that struggle. So the hero usually identifies himself to you in a dream or in your subconscious as this high figure of achievement, And then there's the trickster, and the trickster has been shown in countless stories and cultures. And the trickster usually is where humor comes in. You have the humor, the amusement. It's different. It's totally different than like emotion. It's totally different than power. It's totally different than wisdom. But it brings you understanding, usually through riddles or indirect, clever innuendos. Is how tricksters can form understanding. And they were the jester, in the old times. Now there's more. There are more archetypes that we could go into, but I think those are all kind of foundational, and you can almost find the understanding to almost any dream from understanding these. You said, what about the dark trickster, the Joker? Yeah, there's dark and light to all. So there's good and bad, positive and negative to every archetype, male and female to every archetype. So yeah, the Joker. The Joker will also teach you things, though. You learn valuable lessons from the Joker. It's just it's tougher to integrate that part, as a human. If you guys want, I didn't even get through half of my notes here. Just to let you know. I'd like to do a quick rundown real quick, just for the sake of understanding and for the future replay value of this video. So Carl Jung's first rule is to acknowledge dreams for what they are, acknowledge that they exist. Second rule, stay humble. Don't think that you know it all. Dreams can be blurry. Don't add suggestion. Third rule, keep your interpretations flexible. Make sure they're all hypothetical. Fourth rule, stay close to the symbols, in contrast to Freud's free association. The three parts of the psyche, the consciousness, the personal unconsciousness, the collective unconsciousness. And then we got into the archetypes, the self, the persona, the shadow, the anima, animus, father, mother, wise old man, hero, trickster. And that is the list. And if anyone wants to go deeper on any one of those individual things and you have any questions about them, I appreciate your questions because you bring up things that I haven't thought about, and I still have a lot to learn about all of this. And just know that every day this is what I'm still studying and trying to learn. So, okay, good night, Dee Dee. Good night, Dad. Good night, Helen. Eric, if you're still watching, good night. Anyone who sees this in the future, peace and love. I wish you all the best. You can always throw any questions at me about any of this. And if you're looking for any types of sources, I can link some sources in here. They come mostly from things that I've read, but a lot of it is from like lectures that I found on YouTube and stuff. I will definitely get back with you guys next week. I have so much more to talk about, and I appreciate all of you, and I love you, and I hope you have some sweet dreams.